I want to bring on now, we have Connor Tomlinson from the UK. He's live there. He's been commenting on this. Connor, how are you?
Well, I wish we were talking under better circumstances, Jack. It seems like a dark grey cloud's been cast over my nation for a series of years now, but heavens have opened in the last 24 hours or so.
No, I think that's right. So walk me through this. That why is it that your prime minister seems more upset at the people protesting this heinous murder and series of actions and state-backed indifference than the people who actually did these things?
Because anti-racism has become the sole animating principle of British state for the last, well, one might say since 1948, but especially since 1999 at the very least, with the publication of the Macpherson report following the murder of a black teenager called Stephen Lawrence. And the police were allegedly mishandling that, dragging their feet, and they were accused of institutional racism, you know, that magic word that was spread all across America and then exported to my country in the aftermath of George Floyd's overdose under Derek Chauvin's knee. Keir Starmer took the knee for George Floyd when he was leader of the Labour opposition. Hasn't taken the knee for Henry Nowak. He actually didn't make a statement on Henry Nowak until he was forced to by the Speaker of the House, Sir Lindsay Hoyle, and even then he only just gave a statement on X. So Keir Starmer is indifferent because he believes it is the state's role as a former human rights lawyer, as a communist human rights lawyer, by the way, he was a member of the Haldane Society, a group of communist activists in the legal profession that broke away from the Labour lawyers over support for the Soviet Union, which Starmer visited in the 90s. As a human rights lawyer, he believes it is the role of the government to play umpire between imported, violent, tribal minority groups and the native population, all the while denying that native population has an identity in the first place. And so the most offensive thing to Keir Starmer, to the state, to the legal profession that he mobilised around the clock in 2024 to imprison people for social media posts, the most offensive thing is not that a violent tribal minority who never needed to be in this country in the first place killed a bright young lad like Henry Novak. No. The most offensive thing is you talking about it, is you realising that all of these crimes perpetrated against our children, you know, I've got two on the way now, and I fear for the fate awaiting them if this goes on. If you keep talking about it, then you are somehow causing the problems. You are causing division. You are stopping integration. You are the reason why these imported tribal minorities don't feel like they fit in and they just have to go out and rape and stab our sons and daughters. That's why he's obsessed with this, and that's why the state are obsessed with shutting up anyone in this country who is daring to talk about the problem.
I want to talk more about this. Let's take a quick break. We'll be just back. Jack Posobiec on the murder of Henry Novak, the reaction from Prime Minister Starmer. Human Events Daily. All right, Jack Posobiec back live here, Human Events Daily. We're on with Connor Tomlinson. He's the host of Tomlinson Talks in the UK. He's walking us through the political and societal public reaction to the murder, not just the murder of Henry Novak, by the way, and that as heinous and as awful as that was, we're not just talking about that. We're talking about the fact of the police indifference, the police and law enforcement response that was not to be, and in fact was antagonistic to him in his dying moments. That's what he saw. It's the last thing that he ever heard on this side of heaven. Connor, what do you expect will be the fallout from this? Because it seems that, I mean, just from watching these scenes from the last evening, and I was glued to the live streams all night as far as they went, it seems like this is not going away anytime soon.
Absolutely not. I mean, the public are incandescent with rage over this. If you just look at polling of whether or not the public are aware on issues, most political issues are very Westminster bubble, very low salience. About 70% of the public are following this story closely, and the overwhelming majority are furious, and they blame the police for this. But also remember, number one issue in the country right now is immigration, and this issue is indistinguishable from immigration because of the perpetrator and his family who engaged in corrupt, clannish behaviour, the type we see commonly on the Indian subcontinent. If those people were never in our country, Henry Novak would still be alive. He'd still be going to university. He'd still be palling around with his friends and making silly TikToks with his grieving sister. So the public are well aware of the disparity, not just in the behaviour of the perpetrator and the victim, but in the way that they are treated by their own police officers. Because if you look at the police training for Hampshire and Isle of Wight Constabulary, which is where the killing took place, and if you look at the National Police Action Plan written in the aftermath of George Floyd's overdose, they say, and I quote, that their commitment to racial equity means producing equality of policing outcomes for people from different ethnic groups by responding to individuals and communities according to their specific needs. It does not mean treating everyone the same or being colorblind. Racial equality. So people realized that the police actively discriminate against whites, against the native host majority of our Isles, the English, Scottish, Welsh and Irish, and they believe minorities on the basis that they are minorities, believing they're oppressed ahead of time. And now there is clear evidence, as there has been with the Pakistani rape gangs as well, but that's been actively suppressed by the government. There is clear evidence that these minorities know they occupy a privileged position in our country, that they can carry swords around as a religious exemption, that they can have community activists and organisation groups funded by the taxpayer as charities to advocate for their own sectarian interests, and they can invoke the magic word of racism to escape any and all accountability for their violent action, and the police will show up on scene and believe them. And even as your son or daughter is delivering a death rattle, pleading with them, telling them, I've been stabbed, I'm dying, I'm drowning to death in my own blood, oh dear God, won't someone help me? The police will say, I don't think you have. And the last thing you will hear is them reading you your rights because they believe that racism is the worst crime that anyone could commit, holding a negative opinion of the people that are more likely to kill you than actually killing you. And so setting aside the political implications for this, Jack, based on respective parties, I think that just anti-racism as a governing philosophy has lost all credibility. And with all of the state trying now to tell you what they told us in 2017 after the Manchester Arena bombing, don't look back in anger, which was centrally planned by the government, by the way. We have a department called RICU in the Home Office, which is basically the gaslighting department that stage manages the front pages of newspapers and what politicians say and what hashtags trend on social media in the aftermath of terror attacks, a bit like the Department of Justice's Community Relations Service that coach grieving parents through their victim statements to maintain good race relations. They have gone into overdrive in the aftermath of this, with politicians repeating over and over again, the family don't want this issue politicized, and it's not about Sikhism, it's not about racism, it's about the crime of one evil person. The public isn't buying that. They can see this crime for what it is. They can see that the term racism is used to keep them as second-class citizens, and they just don't care about it anymore. Their children's safety matters more than the offense caused to the people most likely to butcher them in the street.
Look, it's exactly right, and I keep bringing it back to this. When we had the case of Irina Zarutska here in the United States, one of the last cases that Charlie Kirk ever talked about in his entire life, her killer didn't know that she was Ukrainian or Slavic or had any conception that she had fled from war-torn Eastern Europe. He just knew that she was white, and that was enough. I got that white girl. Right? That's what he said. And you see this again and again and again. So it's this identity which hasn't really been sought by white citizens. It's been imposed by outside, by number one, these anti-white behaviors, but then also the fact that we see so many policies discussing race and discussing white identity. But if you if you come at it from anything other than a counter prevailing attitude, you are the one who's depicted as somehow, as you say, being divisive, being bigoted, even if you just repeat their own words back to them. And the level of violence that's been perpetuated in the wake of it has, I think, broken through the last gaps of anyone's tolerance or equity or charity towards any of these situations. People are done. They're just done.
Yeah. I mean, the media circus that has followed this, trying to contain public outrage and reroute it back to the multicultural agenda that the state is more comfortable with, has just been embarrassed for being intellectually impoverished. For example, the Black Police Federation has been touring the television stations in the last few days saying there is no proof of two-tier policing. Well, I know that there's proof of two-tier policing because there's a Black Police Federation and there certainly isn't a white one. Or the example that there are Sikh press associations releasing statements from Vikram Digwa's family saying, we would appreciate public privacy at this time. Vikram Digwa's family disrupted the sentencing hearing for Vikram Digwa by yelling racist at the court, the judge, and Henry Novak's family. So even after they fabricated claims of racism, which, by the way, we shouldn't care about, because even if Henry Novak had said every slur under the sun to this man, he shouldn't have been stabbed to death, but clearly the police care more about that to acquit their own consciences of the accusation of racism than they do about a dying man. But even after they fabricated that claim, for which there was no evidence, the family still tried to use the charge to indict the justice system for daring to prosecute one of their own because they see themselves as a privileged class.
Connor, we're up on a break. Can I hold you over? We'll do a panel coming up after this. I think we're going to stay on this, folks. The camel's back has been broken. Right back here. All right, folks, we're back live. Jack Posobiec, Human Events Daily, and we've got Jack Hadfield now joining us. We've got sort of a UK panel going on with Jack and Connor Tomlinson. Jack, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
So put us in the scene. You were there. You spent the majority of the day with individuals on the ground in Southampton. Tell us what the responses were. Tell us about what it really was, because Keir Starmer, he seems very upset and intent to throw the book at these people who are out there protesting over this murder and the police's lack of response to it.
Yeah, so what you've got to understand about the protests last night is that there were really two protests in a way. The first one started at 6 p.m. outside the Southampton Central Police Station, just near the train station in the south of the town. And I would estimate there were around 3,000 to 4,000 people who turned up there. And that's when people like Tommy Robinson, Nick Tanconi from UKIP, Kelly J. Keane from Let Women Speak spoke on the issue there. And then post the main speaker event, the crowd then moved 2 miles north to Portswood, the Portswood police station, which was actually just round the corner from Belmont Road, where the house was where Henry Novak succumbed to his injuries from Vikram Digwa. And so in that transition period, the first protest was completely peaceful. It was there with people paying their respects to Henry and making their voices heard, to the police. Interesting. It's crazy having gone to a more sort of rightist protest to hear chants of "I can't breathe," which was Henry Novak's last words, and racist police off our streets, which is phrases you usually hear at leftist anti-police protests. So then in the second half of the protest, given that it was 2 miles up the road, the crowd really thinned out. And then later on in the evening, when there was a much smaller percentage of the crowd there, definitely less than 1,000, and then there were only a very small fraction of that crowd who actually engaged in violence with the police. So once again, what was actually a mostly peaceful protest, unlike the BLM riots of 2020, is being portrayed again by the media, by the political establishment, as just being far-right rioters, racist thugs, like they did to everybody at Southport, like they did to the people who were at the Asylum Hotel protest last year. So you can see the narrative that's being spun.
Of course, and obviously the Prime Minister is playing directly into that. Now, I did want to ask just a question of on-the-ground logistics. How far away? So that spot where, because I understand they did actually make it to where Henry Novak died. How far away from that spot is the police station? Are we talking walking distance, driving distance? How far is that?
Oh, we're talking like just around the corner, literally, like a 2-3 minute walk. It is right by the police station.
So it's right by the police station. So if they had needed further assistance, if they had made a call for a first responder or some type of medical unit to come by, or perhaps even tried to transport them, it was right there.
Yes, exactly. And that is what's shocking in the entire thing, is the fact the police seemingly took so long to turn up and to save Henry's life. And I think this is the thing with, I think the focus really should be on the anti-white institution of the police, in that, you know, as Connor's mentioned previously, you know, they assumed that he was a criminal. They cuffed him. They read him his rights. And because he was white, they assumed he was the aggressor. Now, as far as I can tell, because they turned up so late, nothing they would have done, even if they immediately started to help him, he probably still would have died. But if they had turned up earlier and they had behaved the same way, it is entirely possible the police would have been complicit in the murder of a young white man.
Connor, when we're looking at these situations, help us to analyze this. For the average person at home, where's the average British citizen? If you're watching something like this play out across your screens, you saw the Southport murders in 2024, of course, those incredibly disgusting murders. You're seeing this now. Where's the average Brit when it comes to this?
Well, not to paraphrase Barack Obama, but they're thinking that could have been my son. Or the same with the girls butchered by anti-white African Axel Rudy Cabana in 2024, which the entire state conspired to try and tell us was a Welsh choir boy, by the way. I mean, the police at the time wanted to strategically disclose that his parents were of a Christian background in order to deflect blame away from Muslim and migrant communities, because that's their chief concern. But most of the public were thinking, well, that could have been my daughter's just going to a Taylor Swift dance class. They're looking at the politicians.
By the way, Connor, for our audience, because, you know, that case may not be as familiar to them as you know, this most recent one as it is in the UK. If I remember correctly, his name, Axel Rudigabaga, it was a young girls' dance studio, and correct me if I'm wrong, they were having like a Taylor Swift party, and he runs in with a knife and begins stabbing the girls. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, it was a premeditated terror attack based on the fact that he told, you know, school kids in the school before he got kicked out a few years before that he wanted white genocide. He was researching all sorts of anti-white post-colonial literature. He tried to make ricin in his bedroom at home. He'd ordered numerous knives and machetes off of Amazon. And the week before, he'd went to go to his old school and went to stab it. And his dad convinced him not to get in the taxi cab, but didn't call the police on his own son. We're seeing some common threads here. Not only did the police arrive at an absolute horror scene with the Southport massacre. I mean, one of the girls was stabbed over 100 times, and the father couldn't identify his daughter's own body in the mortuary. Not only did the state conspire to cover that up and castigate the public when they were bereaving, call them far right, Keir Starmer famously did that, but in both cases, in Henry Novak's murder with Vikram Digwa and in Axel Rudikabana's killings, the families themselves conspired to cover it up. Because time after time, in the reports that we saw about the Southport murders, the parents tried to stop social workers from intervening. The school was told, don't profile a young black boy with a knife. Just like Vikram Digwa showed violent behaviors, the Sikh community had actually banned him from a Gurdwara because he tried to steal some knives before, I believe. There's footage of him and his brother getting out of a car during a altercation with another driver from before Henry's murder, and he had a sword on his hip that he was about to unsheath and threaten the other drivers with it. So there was knowledge that these children, these men now, you know, Rudy Cabana and Digwa, were violent psychopaths obsessed with weaponry. And Rudy Cabana's case was so anti-white he wanted to stab children. In Digwa's case, clearly knew he could play the race card to try and get away with his violent behavior. And in both cases, not only did the state tell us not to notice this pattern, not only has the family covered it up, but afterwards as well, the community has been mobilized to run interference for this person, because we've seen Sikh organizations come out in recent days, and they've said the Sikh community are not to blame. Okay, fair enough, you know, they didn't commit the crime, but we couldn't have known what was going through Dikwa's head. It's not like he intended to go out and kill Henry Novak. Sorry, how do you know that? Instead, you're just trying to minimize the blame that you might suffer as members of the Sikh or the migrant community, because you know that you benefit from a privileged legal position over the native population in this country whose children are getting killed. And that is driving what's more of the public outrage. It's the knowledge that not only are we second-class citizens, but it's being rubbed in our face, and we're told that we can't be angry about it, and we can't collectively organize while every other group does it at our expense.
Let me go back to Jack here. So, Jack, when you were there at these protests, did you get a sense of this? Because I know we saw that there were some British folks there. There were also some members of the Polish community there. And did you get a sense that that sort of the maybe a lot of the old barriers, between various groups such as those have sort of come down, and really it was very much a group effort where really race did play a role, but of course coming from the attacker, coming from the state, not from their own choosing.
Yes, there's two things here. I mean, firstly, I do think the reaction to the killing of Henry Novak, who of course was half Polish and half English, has kind of shown that the Poles really have been integrated now properly into British society. In that somebody who was a Pole who would have been 10, 15 or so years ago considered as someone who's been coming over from Eastern Europe, getting low wage jobs, screwing up the unemployment rate of native Brits, for example, is now considered to be one of us, in that the police treated him just like they would somebody who was completely white British. And I think as well with the communities, it is not just as Connor said, the fact that the communities themselves rally around one of their own. It's also that the police, on the other hand, also refuses to investigate anything that is that would put these communities in a bad light. Again, going back to Southport, Axel Rudicabana, Prevent was told not to look into him because he was black. As kind of mentioned before, the Manchester Arena bombings, they were not looking into because he was brown and Muslim. The Pakistani rape gangs,
hold that
they looked
right there. Quick break. We'll be right back. I'll let you finish that. This is very important that we're digging into. Human Events Daily. Jack Posobiec back live, Human Events Daily. We're talking about the aftermath of the murder of Henry Novak, young boy in the UK. And actually, over at humanevents.com, we've just published an article, and I want everyone to go there and see it, where the police guidance that led to Henry Novak's arrest while bleeding to death was actually sparked by the George Floyd case. And this comes in amid criticism by Amnesty International. They're attacking, of course, Nigel Farage and his statements talking about cold, hard rage. They say there's no such thing as two-tier policing. But Nigel Farage has pointed out that the police race action plan is based, and its guidance are based on policing outcomes. And of course, those were there in place because of George Floyd. The policy, part of the police anti-racism commitment, this is what our guests were just telling us, were published in 2022, and we've got the entire framework there, and cites the difficult history in the relationships between police and the black communities. So, and let me get Connor back on to comment on this very quickly. So, kind of this report that Human Events is talking about, this policy is specifically cited, whereby they're saying that the police have been instructed, essentially, that when they arrive at a scene, they are to respond exactly as these officers in Southampton did. They are to treat one as the victim, just based on race, and one as the perpetrator, again, just based on race. How can you have that?
Well, you can have that because, as I said earlier, Jack, anti-racism is their only concern. And the George Floyd riots put this on steroids after 2020, when my country became ideologically captured by the same communist revolution that took over America and caused billions of dollars in damage and loss of life. What happened here is we had total institutional capture, and it amplified the pre-existing anti-racist policies that the police were carrying out that led to, for example, the institutional cover-up of the Pakistani rape gang scandal, which is still going on today, by the way, and police turning a blind eye, arresting the girls or their fathers who tried to free them from the Pakistani torture chambers that they were being gang raped in, because they wanted to keep community cohesion, or they didn't want to upset race relations. The same happened because of the infamous non-crime hate incidents that I'm sure you've all heard about over in the States, where people get not just locked up for social media posts, but they get a scarlet letter against their name for offensive speech that is not criminal, but that a minority has called the police up anonymously and complained about. And the police have to believe that a non-crime has been committed by virtue of a minority being offended. So being offended is proof enough to prevent law-abiding British people from being banned from jobs because someone's been offended by something they've said online or in person. And so the entire state is obsessed with anti-racism. And what you're reading there is just the explicit codification, the kind of constitution of anti-racism, if you will. But this is just in writing what the police have been doing for decades. And it's now culminated in the brutal murder of Henry Novak and his last moments on Earth being dragged across gravel and essentially tortured by the people that he hoped had arrived on the scene and would keep him safe.
That's exactly right. Let me go over to Jack Hadfield here. So, Jack, when you're speaking to the protesters, when you're speaking to the demonstrators on there, they're very aware of this. They're talking about, you can hear it in the chants that you filmed, they're talking about racist police. This is bigger than just Southampton. Where do we go from here? When you spoke to the protesters, what did they want to see in terms of relief?
Yeah, well, it seems obvious to me, and it seems obvious to most people who've been talking about this, that, you know, we need a full crackdown on the so-called anti-racist institutions within the police force. I think it's pretty clear that anti-racism just means anti-white. And as Connor said, this has been going on for decades. If you look back to the Macpherson report, following that of Stephen Lawrence, the Casey report, the police have, for example, stopped stopping and searching young black men because they were disproportionately accounted for being stopped and searched, because maybe that's because they were committing more crimes or had more knives on them, for example. But now, you know, the police very specifically do not have a race blind policy. It is not that. Actually, they treat ethnic minorities better than white Brits. So what we need is a full root and branch reform of the British police to completely remove anti-racism, anti-white hatred from the police, all of the other DII policies. But I don't necessarily think that might even be enough. I think it's perhaps the case that the British police as an institution is so far gone, so ideologically captured, that you basically need to make an entire police force from the ground up. Certainly everybody at the top, everybody at the College of Policing, everybody in the Independent Police Commission, cannot have any sway anymore over policing in Britain. I think all of these people have anti-racism as one of their driving factors in how they think of policing in this country, and we simply can't let it go on.
No, I think that's right. Connor, let me get you back in here. Talk to us again about some of the political ramifications. We know that there's elections that have been happening. Nigel Farage, of course, jumping in. Where do you see all of this going?
So there's been three political reactions. There's been the tone-deaf one by the irrelevant and treacherous Conservative Party, who Vikram Digwal was not imported under Boris Johnson's Boris wave, but he imported about 6 million of Vikram Digwal's co-ethnics in about 6 years, and they remain unrepentant for that. Kemi Badenoch, the Nigerian anchor baby who is leading the Conservative Party, who championed the Boris wave at the time, went on television and said, I don't want to hear about White Lives Matter and I don't want to hear about Black Lives Matter. But she was very happy to make her entire career off of Black Lives Matter in 2021, when she said, we all know Black Lives Matter, but to deliver real racial equity, I need to be appointed as part of this race equality commission, and then she used that as her soapbox to launch her national political career. So they're largely irrelevant and absolutely reprehensible. Nigel Farage delivered a very strong statement the other day. It was uncharacteristically strong, honestly, because Nigel Farage has indulged before, and Jack and I may disagree on this, but some soft rhetoric that has placated some of the politically correct narratives which have led to this sort of anti-racist policing. For example, saying there is no such thing as an indigenous British person, or saying that we can't do deportations because there'd be too much political backlash. Instead, he came out and said white people have lived in this country for centuries and now they are being treated as second-class citizens, and anti-white racism is rife and needs to be rooted out. Agree with every syllable, and I'll make a bold prediction here. I think if an election is earlier than 2029, that will be the speech that won Nigel Farage the ability to be Prime Minister. Now it's just a question of whether or not he can deliver on that. The third element, of course, in this is Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain, the sort of outrider party that has splintered away from reform after Farage and his deputy called the police on Rupert, which wasn't very edifying. Rupert called to restore the death penalty for Vikram Digwa and deport his parents. And now I think whether or not Reform wins government instead of Restore, because Restore is much further back than them in the polls, it would certainly be an election-winning platform pledge for Reform just to lift wholesale from Restore that promise, and to say, not only are we going to restore the death penalty and deliver it to Vikram Digwa and Aksaruddin Khabana and all the Pakistani grooming gang perpetrators, not only are we going to deport the family members who cover up these sorts of crimes, but we are going to shut our doors to the Indian subcontinent forever, because Restore Britain have promised to ban all Indian migration going forward. Reform haven't made that promise yet, but I guarantee the British public would be on board with it.
Well, and it certainly seems that some of those policy planks are now being picked up. I want to thank you guys for joining us here on the panel today. I know it's a bit later for you guys than it is for us in the U.S., so I appreciate it very much. Connor, where can people follow you?
They can follow me on X, Substack, and YouTube, just at my name, Connor Tomlinson. They can occasionally see me popping up on the Lotus Eaters.
Of course. Jack, what are your coordinates?
Yeah, you can follow me on X primarily at Jack Hadders. It's been the thing that's been popping up, of course, all over the show so far. All of my other links are available at jackhadfield.co.uk.
No, great work to both of you guys. And folks, just to understand where we're at as not just a country, but as Western civilization. If Western civilization is going to survive, we need to be allowed to talk about these issues, to confront these issues, and deal with them to get back to a peaceful and safe society, safe from the anti-whites.